Let's bring Spike back. Oh, Spike lost his audio, so he's going to reboot. Downtown Joe is here, mentor to future radio stars. I'm Bob Rivers, wannabe musician. I changed it away from politics because I am so tired of talking about politics. Even to
Well,
not take a side is, that Rush song? If you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice.
yes, that's Rush, not yes, but yes, I know
Oh,
that
it is
song.
Rush. That's right.
Yes, it is Rush, and you said Rush, but I said yes.
Oh, you said yes. Well,
But I know, yes, what
both
song you're
inducted the
talking
same year into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. All right, let's see if we got Spike's little mic thing fixed. Are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, we're all good to go. We're going to be joined by the late Cathy Faulkner, our surprise guest this week, who was our music director and interim program director during a very important part of the show's development at KISW, the very first radio station we all worked together at in Seattle. And still, between KISW and KZOK, then was 2 decades of being very fortunate in the right place at the right time and having a great city and really wonderful managers and support people. Did it go to shit after that? Not really. It was more challenging at KJR because we were working for Clear Channel, which became iHeartRadio, and there was a
How do
little
you
more
pronounce that? iHeart?
iHeartRadio. Yeah,
Oh, I thought it was I hurt.
iHeartRadio. Yeah,
I've been saying it wrong all these years. I'm so
yeah.
sorry.
Well, and we originally worked for Entercom, which I used to call Rear Entercom because you love to make fun of the places you work. And now you work for Bonneville, which by all accounts is one of the kindest, most human radio groups out there.
Yeah, they're
And,
good people.
and actually, really, all of the people at the local level have always been great. We've
Yeah,
always had
that's true.
supportive program directors, market managers. There was a brief time when we were at CBS and we were supposed to be syndicated, and the syndication deal somehow fell through. And I had to fly to New York to sit down with the major, the what do you call them in the mafia? The
Emperor?
bosses.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. And when I made that trip to New York, it happened to coincide with the final episode of The Sopranos. And I don't know if I've ever told you this story, but I went with our agent, Paul, and our market president, Lisa, and we went to the bar where Tony Soprano would come to New York for the sit-down meetings
Yeah,
with the New York Mafia. You remember that bar?
you brought me a T-shirt.
Yes.
I still have it.
So we went to that bar with 300 other fans to watch the final episode of The Sopranos, greatest series about the mafia ever done. And I will say that the most mafia experience I had in that trip to New York was actually sitting down with the CBS bosses, not that bar. But it's all water under the bridge and bodies in the bags, fully decomposed now.
It's
So
all mobsters under the dirt now,
exactly.
Yeah.
It's all good. So it's Bob, Spike, and Joe. Kathy's going to join us in just a little bit. Before she does, I'll just say this. We want to talk to her about the miracle that happened at KISW in the 90s and the miracle of Seattle music. And each one of us has our own experiences getting to hang with some of the big, huge stars or, invite them to my garage to play. But it was Cathy Faulkner who really worked doing I call it the Lord's work because to me, music is like a religion. And bands were breaking in Seattle and then going national all over the country. And between our program director of Steve Young and Cathy Faulkner, they were the radio station that people looked to from all over the country as to what was happening. When did the end start? That was sort of
Oh,
They were
early in the
right.
90s, right?
They were right in the right there too, in the like 92, 93.
92. That's what I was thinking too. A little bit 92, 93 after
Yeah,
the
it
whole world
wasn't.
had come here.
Yeah, and they had a lot to do with it. Marco Collins
Yeah.
and all the folks that were over there at the time. They did their share of
And
playing new music for sure.
suddenly we had an arch competitor But weren't we part of the same company? I can't recall. No, we weren't the same company until 1997.
No,
Yeah,
because
that's when
is that
Entercom
what-
bought the stations. Yeah.
Oh, right. We were nationwide before that.
Yeah.
But
So
but I will say this: grunge happened because of KISW. The end happened because of grunge.
it was opportunistic. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'll go with Cathy is responsible for everything because she's going to be our special guest.
And I'll tell you, Cathy will probably tell you that Damon Stewart is as responsible as she is, or more so, because Damon was the one out there in the clubs at midnight finding these bands, and and
he was the new music guy.
Yeah, the new music, the Nirvana and everything didn't start in drive time on a major label. It started on cassette tapes with our new music guru on KISW on Sunday nights.
That's right. I remember that. Did
I remember Damon Stewart interviewing the Red Hot Chili Peppers at the station on a Sunday afternoon because nobody else wanted to give them the time of day. And the only thing the band was wearing were socks, and they weren't wearing them on their feet. I swear. I walked in the production room B to do our weekly comedy syndication that we were doing at the time. I went in to dub off some tapes, and there was Damon with these 4 naked tattooed guys from California.
Wearing
and they
sock.
looked at me wearing socks. And I was like, okay, buddy. And it was the Chili Peppers.
Now, were there pictures
of those guys doing that?
I mean, this is pre-smartphone. This is even kind of the internet.
Yeah, this was. I mean, they performed like that at the time. That was their shtick.
That was their encore for
yeah. And they lived up to it, man.
When you're trying to make a name for yourself, you take your clothes off. I know there's other people who've done that.
We did it, all 3 of us, right?
For a few years. So
yeah,
so the Chili Peppers made quite a brand. That was their deal. So
that is hilarious, Joe. A unique observation, which could spruce up politics. I think we get some younger players involved in politics.
That's for sure.
Not with the current octogenarians.
Yeah, I see. I don't want to see Dianne Feinstein rolled into the halls of Congress wearing nothing but a wheelchair.
By the way, before Cathy comes on, I got to just pass on a tip. I've been telling everybody I know about this new series, and it's on Netflix, which is the network just about everybody has, right?
Yeah.
You got Netflix, Joe, right?
You bet. I've had it since day one, or ever since they gave it to me.
All right,
a long time ago.
Oh, you still have the free account we got?
Nope, not officially, right, Joe?
It's just always worked. You guys probably do too.
I mean, if I only knew how to log in.
Yeah.
Oh well. I know someone once gave us a Bitcoin too, and the certificate is at the bottom of the dump somewhere.
5 of them.
5 Bitcoin
each.
Joe, are they in your locker somewhere?
No, I am someday when I don't have time. I think you could say I'm busier than a one-legged man in a butt kicking contest. I mean, I've always got, so many things in the air, but I do know that this guy came in and it was a piece of paper. It wasn't a coin, but it had a code.
The certificate.
Each of us at the time it was worth
Bitcoin.
about $5. At the time it was worth about $5, but now it would be worth about 75 grand, I think. And
Bitcoin is around 20 grand each, so it'd be worth 100 grand.
Right. So we've got that piece of paper somewhere, or it got tossed out. Who knows? But someday I'm going to dig through some old boxes, and you never know, might find one.
And do they have our names on them?
Well, they have the serial number of that particular coin.
Yeah, it was a code you were supposed to go on and register. I never registered. I never did anything. I don't think I tossed it in the garbage though, because I'm a pack rat. So it's probably somewhere. And
so there are 3 certificates worth 5 Bitcoin somewhere in your archives.
No, there is
one.
With Joe. Now,
if you didn't take ours home too.
I have no idea. He gave you one. He gave Spike one. He gave me one. I don't know.
You have them. You know you have them. This is where people start fighting over inheritance.
If I had them, I would have probably done something with them when they were worth $1,000 each. If I have them, it's a mystery to me.
So you still have like a storage unit with all the old show stuff, and no one's ever gone through, right?
I have vinyl. From speaking of KISW, when they abandoned the building. They left us there and they left boxes of records, and they got picked over, and Cathy Faulkner and all the people who actually knew what a record was worth took the bulk of it, but they were going to throw hundreds of records in the dumpster. So I've had them in storage for a long time. So
Nobody will ever want vinyl again for anything. Who is this vinyl?
At some point,
dead.
when I get broke enough and have enough time on my hands, I need to just see what is in there.
All right, I'm looking to see if I sent Cathy the link. Oh, I might not have sent her the link.
That'll slow down her ascension to the show, won't it?
It will. Hold on, let me send her a link. You guys talk amongst yourselves. Okay.
I look back.
I sent it to her.
I look back on the early 90s in Seattle and KISW as the greatest gift I was ever given in my life. We were literally at the center of the musical universe through nothing but landing here by blind luck, and got to watch all that happen around us. It probably was what like being in London in 64, 65 was like, what San Francisco in 67, 68 was like. And here in 89, 90, 91, 92 was everywhere. Everything was happening.
It's a unique thing. When you're in LA and the Eagles make it and all these big LA and America, and I'm trying to think of, Tom Petty, who was in Laurel Canyon. You expect that because you're in LA, you're in an entertainment capital. Like you're near Hollywood. But when you're in Seattle, where people basically, lock themselves indoors 9 months out of the year. And I want to ask Cathy about this too. That's part of how the sound came to be distinct, is that it was just a different mindset that went into making the music. Oh yeah, from the parody of Them Beans was our actual that version of that song. A Bob Spike and Joe twisted tune. Tonight is very special because we have a very special guest on the Bob Spike and Joe show. We have the late Cathy Faulkner, who is joining us from Orcas Island.
I'm actually in Seattle today.
You're in Seattle. She has studios all over the Pacific Northwest.
No, I don't. But yes, I do. I'm sorry. Yes, I do.
Yeah.
All over.
Yeah. Well, you have.
That's the artwork in your satellite studio.
It is. Yeah.
Look at you, man.
Cool stuff to hang in every room that he ever walks into. I mean,
that's 20 years of radio, Spike. They're using all space.
Can I say the behind the scenes of our visit yesterday a little bit?
Totally. Yeah.
Okay. At her home, because Cathy does voice work, she does rock and roll stuff. She does like 3 different kinds of Zoom meetings. So she has 3 different walls decorated differently. One's for a corporate meeting with people in suits and ties.
Yeah, and the
Go ahead,
backstory
describe.
the backstory is that when COVID hit, I hadn't finished my studio, so it was insulated, but it just had the brown paper covering. And in COVID Zoom meetings, that is, it's not even green screen. You can't do anything fancy with it. So I bought a bunch of different vinyl wallpaper. And so we have red brick on one and we have white brick for the corporate wall. And then I put up my plaques and Seattle stuff for being hip now and wow. So
for anybody wondering what Cathy Faulkner has been doing since the heyday of KISW in the 90s, when the Seattle music scene exploded, she's been one of the most amazing voice talents in the voiceover commercial recording world. You have heard Cathy Faulkner 1,000 times, and maybe
Thank
not.
you for calling.
Yes.
We appreciate your patience. We'll accidentally hang up on you momentarily.
So you did that stuff.
I knew I recognized that voice.
Are you part of the phone tree? And
Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny. Hey, but I mean, what an amazing career you had, entirely apart from radio, doing that, and you love it, right?
I absolutely love it. Yeah, absolutely love it.
And it was tailor-made for the pandemic.
Yes, little did I know. Absolutely. I worked out of my studio to begin with, and then once COVID hit, they're like, "Do you have a studio at your house?" As a matter of fact, I do.
All set. Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Which wall would you like?
And a real testament, Cathy, to tenacity, hard work, and wanting to learn something. Because I remember when you started with Campy, with Jim Campman as your
Yeah.
mentor, and it's
Yeah.
like, I want to get into this voice thing, and you're making demos. And I remember, and we're going to talk a little about the 90s and stuff, but one thing I know about Cathy is nobody worked harder, because I was there a lot at night working on our show. Of course, her show was at night, so she kind of had to be there, but she taught me so much in the nighttime, and then in her free time, she learned from Campy about this voice thing. And I'm like, man, that sounds like a good deal, making money just talking and saying stuff. And I did a little, but you turned it into a full-time enterprise and a big time deal. So
Yeah, Campy
congratulations
was an
on that.
amazing mentor. He drug me along to many, when we did voice sessions in studios, he took me to many studios and many sessions and taught me so much. Yeah.
Yeah, taught us all.
I think he
Yeah.
taught us all. And
Yeah.
ironically, he drug me to 12-step meetings, which was very helpful.
You learned a lot. Look at you now. You know?
I see. I love that past tense of dragged. He drugged me. So all right, let's go back into the Wayback Machine, way back, and just briefly tell the legendary story of how Cathy Faulkner joined KISW, because she wasn't old enough to get into an R-rated movie, I don't think.
No, I started at KISW at the age of 15. Started as a fan of KISW a few years prior to that, and would call in on Steve Slayton's night program and make requests, much like Mike McCready and Chris Novoselic and many of the other local rock icons would call in and try and stump Slayton. But it was a 9th grade English class. I had to interview somebody in media. It's like, well, duh, I'm going to call Steve and ask him if he'd help me with my school assignment. And he was so gracious. He said, absolutely. Went down to the station, which was on Stewart Street at the time, had a whole bunch. I think I had like 50 something stupid ass questions that a 15-year-old would ask about radio, thinking it was, the atom bomb going off as far as intellect. But he was patient and gracious with every single question, and got an A on the assignment. And I think a few months later, he asked if I would come.
Whoops.
So, sorry.
No, we
back.
lost you
You're
for a
back.
second, but you're back.
I'm back.
Yes. So a few months later,
he asked me to come in and answer phones for him. So that's how I got in the door. Actually, my parents drove me to the
child
station.
labor was born.
Exactly.
Illegal child labor. Woo!
A few months later, he asked his boss if he could hire a call screener, and they said, no, we're not giving you any money.
it was for free, right? It was an internship.
It was not for free. I got 7 records a week.
Oh,
A record a day.
So yeah, basically child labor. But being in high school and getting 7 records a week from KISW.
Yeah, that's.
Hello.
Yeah.
I didn't have any trouble getting a date to the prom.
No, you felt like a billionaire at that point.
Totally.
Because,
yeah.
Records were more valuable than money, because we would spend every penny we had, and we would scrape the couch for extra pennies.
Yeah, and I didn't have the money for the records or the concert tickets, and so cheers, Slayton, man. You made my high school years magic.
So what year is this that you started?
81, 82.
Okay. Not that we're going to do the math. We don't have no idea how old you are.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
All right. So you start 81 or 82. Around 1989, after a schism that separates half of KISW, goes over to
the X.
The X.
Yeah.
And then
that was 87.
That was 87.
Yeah.
And around 89, they bring in this out-of-town morning show that... and I remember making a very clumsy entrance to the station, much like many clumsy things I did at that part of my life. But we came in, and I think it was almost simultaneously that something started happening in Seattle. Do I have that right? Was it 89? Was it 90? When did you see the seeds of the Seattle music explosion?
The challenge for me, Bob, is that I worked at night, and I was underage, so I didn't really get to go into the clubs. But in the mid 80s, it was percolating, as you would say.
Okay.
88 is when I really noticed it being much bigger than just, hey, a local band's got a following. this is really real.
Okay. And
Yeah.
drop a few band names from them, some that made it big, but maybe some that were just part of the developing scene.
In the 80s, well, Slayton and I were working very closely with Queensryche in the 80s, which always gets excluded from the Seattle music scene. So I have to say the 80s belonged to Queensryche and Metal Church and Sanctuary and many of the metal bands, as the punk, grunge, rock, hybrid Seattle convergence was starting to explode. It was a time where there wasn't a lot of original music in the clubs. So the bands were renting VFW halls and hub ballrooms and student union buildings to put together shows. And that's kind of part of that family, magic of multiple bands on a bill. So Nirvana, Soundgarden, Mother Love Bone, Green River, Skin Yard.
So this is all late 80s, but has not exploded across the country yet.
Oh,
No. And if anybody from New York or LA comes in to do this biopic on Seattle and try and figure out what the magic sauce in the 80s was, there's one show that always comes up. And I think you guys were working at the station at the time, and that was the Rising Star show that we had with Jane's Addiction, with Soundgarden and Mother Love Bone opening. It was in 1989, and it was at the Paramount, and it was undeniable that there was something about to explode in our.
So we were not
our back.
underage, but we were doing mornings and our alarm clock went off at 4 a.m. This is the funniest thing.
I was there.
You were there?
Yay! I was there for part of it.
I remember my first week in town. Joe mentioned Guru, Damon Stewart. And I know that he was out there when you were working. He was out clubbing and trying to bring you things that, that were going to hit. For my first week in Seattle, Damon said, "You got to come." And I had just come with Bob from the East Coast, and I couldn't have been more East Coast if you shoved a flagpole up my ass. Pardon me, Joe.
We still,
It was. I was
you still got a touch of the East in you. Yeah.
I was, Springsteen and the Police and blah, 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 and Elvis Costello and British 80s and blah, blah, blah. And Damon said, "Come see my roommate's band." And I went down the Central Tavern with him, and his roommate was Lane Staley, and it was Alice. And I'd been here a week.
So this is August 1989.
Yeah. And my jaw hit the floor.
Yeah.
And I couldn't believe what I was not just seeing and hearing, but standing in the middle of absorbing. I'm like, this is like nothing I've ever seen in my life. It was, yeah.
Yeah, 89 to 91 was this absolutely magical time. Mother Love Bone had their major label deal, and we're about to launch nationally. And Alice had their deal with Columbia, and other bands were getting signed, and it was all starting to just about launch in 90. And what was it, March of 1990, when the wind was taken out of our sails when we lost Andrew.
Yep.
My internet sucks. I'm sorry.
You know what?
You're doing good. You're doing.
When that does that, I reboot this thing called echo cancellation, and it fixes it. So I actually figured a workaround.
Really?
Yeah. So, all right. So tell me if this is right. You and I have discussed several things over the last couple of years. Interestingly, because Cathy was on at night and I was on in the morning. We were on in the morning.
We never saw each other.
We didn't much, although at key important times we did, because Cathy became the interim program director in, I think, 1996-7, somewhere in there, when Entercom bought the station from Nationwide Communications. And it was a key moment for the show because we now were sister stations with our former mortal enemies, the End and the Mountain.
That was a unique dynamic to learn.
And a shifting dynamic. And at the time, Steve Young, who was all of our mentor and programmer, and really a partner with Cathy to navigate the explosion of artists in the 90s. So going back again to 90, 91-ish or so, Steve arrives, you're there, these bands are getting signed. In my heart, I want to give you guys all the credit for making this happen. I know you get some, but put it into perspective. The End didn't exist yet, right? When did The End actually come on the air?
I wish I knew the exact date, but I believe the date that the end went on the air was the day that Nevermind came out.
Wow. Okay. So, do you think
I
that was
could Google it. If
okay?
you'd like.
Well, someone will Google it. David, could you Google that and put a scroll across the bottom?
But the big thing was like Nirvana, they adopted as their band, and there were many aspects of the Seattle music scene that was a different musical style than KISW is or was known for. So they had their lane, we had our lane, but when it came to Seattle,
It all crossed over.
it all
Most of it.
crossed over. Yeah.
So, all right. So I'm trying to understand. So it's the late '80s. These bands are getting signed. Does that mean the record companies were doing their job and the A&R guys spotted what was happening in Seattle before radio stations started adding it, or did it take?
I would like to say yes. There's some amazing talents in A&R, and our guru was A&R for Epic as well. There were many ears in Seattle, and there were many good ears in Seattle. So I would like to say that the intentions were good, but I think it's also safe to say that many of the labels that signed these artists early on didn't know what they had, and the rest of the country didn't know what was coming.
Okay.
You take any trend, whether it's a viral TikTok video or a band in the 80s, to get across the country at that time could take 2 to 5 years.
Yeah,
to catch legs.
And
we didn't have the internet.
And the first few create momentum that everybody else is able to draft. And so, like when it comes to streaming TV, you had The Sopranos, you had Orange Is the New Black, you had House of Cards, and all of a sudden, all of these investors say we've got to make incredible TV. Well, back then, this sort of thing used to happen with music because you had, as you said, ears. And man, George Martin wrote a book. I think it was called "All You Need Is Ears." And these days, they're artificial ears. It's all artificial intelligence. It's all algorithms. It's all research trying to play the safest thing or the thing you're most likely to like, which is, tell me if you believe this, not the same as a curator, a great music director, a great program director, or even a great record A&R guy, or Spike going out to a club and experiencing Alice in Chains and Chains, and then you become an evangelist for the record. Would you say that?
Totally.
Yeah,
I would absolutely agree. And Seattle is one of the last regional musical phenomenons to take place. In fact, as far as a regional, organic, global paradigm shift or major change in how we look at music, there hasn't been that kind of an event since Seattle.
No.
And
I don't think
because
go ahead.
Because of the internet, it happens now online, so everybody's so connected.
But it happens Gangnam Style now. It happens with one-hit wonders of pop music that nobody is evangelizing. That it goes by these algorithms. Everybody loves it, and then the artist is broke a year later.
But that happened back then before the internet.
Yeah, well, it's great ears.
We would call them one-hit wonders.
For every Alice in Chains and Pearl Jam, and I'm not going to name names, Cathy could name many. Think about all the bands from Seattle that thought they had a deal and thought they were going to be successful, and it didn't work that way.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody, and they asked me when the scene changed, and I said it was when Seattle when the word grunge went from an adjective to a proper noun. Is when the market changed, and when everybody and their dog came here and had to have a Seattle band on their label, and you would just hope that they were signing them in the hopes that they would advocate for them and market them as for the talents that they were, but at the same time it was just filler to say we have a Seattle band on our roster. We're done.
Was singles good or bad for the music scene here?
I think it was fabulous for the music scene.
Yeah.
I also think I think singles was an amazing time capsule of what Seattle was for us in 1990 to 1992. With it, there's some Hollywood stuff, but I think Cameron Crowe did an excellent job. I also think, oh my gosh, I'm spacing at the name. It's the other Hype, the documentary Hype.
Yeah.
It does an excellent job of showing the clear-cut component that came into the Seattle music scene. In fact, the metaphor is of clear cutting a forest in the Northwest. And it shows how you can love something to death and really make the price too high.
But we're talking now heading towards 50 years later. We're not there yet, but we're past 40. It's
Jesus.
still huge. I teach in a high school, and I see a
No,
Nirvana
we're 30.
shirt.
We're 33 years later. Please.
I know.
Do you know why, Joe? Do you know why?
Why do I see a Nirvana shirt everywhere? Or why can't I figure out the time? Which one?
Prevagen,
well,
Joe. You need
yeah,
some
I can't-
Prevagen. But
I can't
yes.
help you with the time.
Well, either way, it was a long time ago. And now students, I have a student who is obsessed with that whole era of music. And all he does is ask me questions about it. And I said, you need to talk to Cathy Faulkner and Damon Stewart. I said, frankly, I was chasing Jerry Garcia around most of those years.
Yeah,
I
you
missed
were.
a lot of that, which I'm quite proud of too. And there's plenty of kids that want to talk to me about Jerry Garcia, and I can answer their questions. But it's amazing that this Seattle thing has and probably will last for a really long time, because
Thousands
there's
of years.
generations now that
Yeah.
love this stuff.
Thousands of years. And so here's another thing that's going on with music, and I'd love to get your unique perspective on it. As classic rock artists get on in years, many of them are selling their catalogs to companies like Hypnosis and other publishing companies that are amassing all of this stuff. And a lot of people think they're paying way too much money. I think they're making a brilliant investment.
I think they're making a brilliant investment as well.
Okay. And I'll let you finish that thought.
I have so many feelings watching different artists that I've loved over the years, watching their descendants fight over an estate. I think if I were in Bruce Springsteen's shoes, I would sell my catalog as well and kind of forget that aspect. That said, the immortal contribution, the musical legacy of a Led Zeppelin or a Elvis Presley or a Bruce Springsteen, or for, a Kurt
Nirvana.
Cobain,
Sure.
Nirvana, Pearl Jam and Alice and so on and so forth. There is an entire business, between licensing and music and merchandise, all that stuff, that I think these licensing companies or these publishing companies are getting these libraries for a song.
Yeah.
I don't think they're paying enough.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, I didn't realize this right away. I thought it was like really odd that they're buying this old music from people who are near the sunset of their entire lives, not just their careers. But then I took my granddaughters to a Minions movie, and the soundtrack of Minions includes Fly Like an Eagle by Steve Miller.
Yeah.
It includes Instant Karma. It includes all of these classic rock songs. You see, when you're getting hundreds of millions of dollars to make a movie for 7 and 9-year-olds, you want to buy songs that have a track record. It's why there's a Spider-Man 20 movie coming out at some point. And so this music, and this is when I started to think about it, instead of selling out your music, you're actually putting it with investors who are going to cultivate and curate the catalog, maybe for lifetimes to come. I honestly think that classical music is what the equivalent of this classic rock is now. That I used to joke that a classical station would be the greatest hits of the 1400s, 1500s, and 1600s.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that it's possible in 500 years that this music will still have power because it was done in an era of multi-track recording and great sound. So it's not like it's limited like old black and white movies can never quite be as big. This is state-of-the-art stuff. And nowadays, there is no curation. There are no DJs telling you how much
No.
they love the bands, and there are no people fighting to curate it down to the ones that are worthy of being signed. You can be signed by opening a TikTok account,
Right.
and using an app to make something that sounds okay, but it's
And curating, I think, is the key word. I think many of these artists are signing these deals, and there's also a question of who owns the master, who has the original recording. I don't know if you guys remember several years ago, there was a fire at the Universal Studios. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, one of the Nirvana masters was in that building, a
A
Soundgarden
lot,
master.
a lot of
There was
stuff.
the REM masters. There were a lot of masters under the Universal umbrella that were lost in that fire. And it came out that there wasn't proper curating or documenting of what actually was in there. Because you know what I mean? My internet sucks. I'm sorry.
No, I just rebooted it. Every time that
reboot.
happens, I do a reset. So yes, and that's the thing about the digital age that we live in now, is that everything is ones and zeros. So another thing about this point in human history that we were, I think, lucky enough to grow up in this time is that the art and classic materials that were created in this time butted right up against the digital era, where no tapes are going to get destroyed anymore. No, nothing's going to get erased, which
Right.
is sad if you've got naked pictures on the internet. Thankfully,
Right. I was so glad I was in radio in the 80s.
yeah.
90s.
Every stupid thing we did, including, well, nude stock wasn't stupid, but every dumb thing we did is before these cameras.
I
So
know.
it's just
Before cell phones, thank
it's a
God.
fond memory. But now everything is preserved, and
Yeah, and
interesting.
you also talk musical style. If you recall the documentary that Dave Grohl did of Sun City with a studio in California where they recorded Nirvana's Nevermind, is also where many of the great '70s records came out of. We have London Bridge in our back door, backyard here up in Seattle, and they've got, is it Neve board, that beautiful. Yeah, the Neve board that has that beautiful sound that is synonymous with '70s rock, but also is that flavor that was in many of the releases here in the Northwest.
A unique thing happened. We talked about this a while back. I should say just a heartfelt thanks to Cathy and Nell, who, when I had my cancer diagnosis a year ago, they reached out to me, and we got to actually sit down and hang out together without us being on opposite sleeping schedules. And you guys were super kind and everything. And we got to talk a little about some of this stuff. There's, I lost my train of thought. Could you get me your Prevagen, Joe? I need some Prevagen.
We were at London Bridge and the Neve sound.
Okay.
But you were thanking Cathy and Nels for something after that.
Well, so these recording studios, and Seattle has, and this is, I heard you on another interview say that you were not fond of the G word, because when people say Seattle, they associate it with just grunge. But there's a rich musical legacy, probably going all the way back to Ray Charles here, that includes Jimi Hendrix and Hart, and then other bands that didn't fit the G label, like Posies or who else?
Well, I mean, I would start with the bands that I couldn't go see in Astor Park because I was underage. It would be the Range Hood, the Cowboys, the Allies, Rail. Pop quiz. Who else?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so there was like the whole
a round of Prevagen for everybody.
I know, right?
Our new show sponsor.
Yeah, I've researched that shit. By the way, it doesn't work. There is no medical science behind it. Every time I see the news and they advertise Prevagen, I go,
"It's having cue cards and like looking up lists of things."
Yes, that's right. It's Google for research. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
But there's grunge comes with a specific definition, and with that, they very rarely do you hear more than the top 5. You know, you don't hear about Candlebox, you don't hear about Sweetwater, you don't hear about Brad, you don't hear about Sean Smith.
Screaming Trees.
Screaming Trees, yeah. Oh. And if the list goes past 5, and I'm not trying to discredit the 5 at all, but the breadth and depth that this community had and still has, I think it just does it a big disservice to just say grunge.
Well, we keep talking about, how bands get found and how nowadays people don't take chances. They make safe bets. Like Bob said, there's a Spider-Man 20 coming out.
Right.
But there was nothing safe about backing Soundgarden or Alice in Chains, or when Andrew passed and we lost Love Bone, those guys, a lot of bands would give up and quit, and well, that was our shot. We lost our guy. But they made Mookie and they found Eddie and they made Pearl Jam and they just
Yeah.
would not go away.
And the magic of the Temple of the Dog project that gave
Right,
them a vehicle for grief and a vehicle for
Yep.
new music collaboration.
Or Mad Season with
Yeah.
you know that piece of work was a masterpiece.
Brilliant.
And to your point, Spike, Dave Grohl lost his guy too.
Yeah, and didn't
Whatever
go
happened
away.
to him?
I know. I think he's working at it. I saw he was flying planes once. I saw on TV.
Yeah.
You know, and
I'm
selling
waiting for my
Mentos.
invite to the barbecue. I want to go to girls' barbecue.
So, Cathy, during that time, and I heard some of this in an interview you did with another music director. So I'm going to just try and get to the nugget that struck me. During that time, radio stations, and by the way, it wasn't just from Seattle at this point. There were bands like Tea Party. There were bands coming from all over. There were bands like Live. There were bands that had elements of this new sound because it was huge. And you were the music director of one of the top stations in the country that was respected for being a curator of this music. And you worked with Steve Young, and then after he left, on your own. But how did you tell us a little bit of the behind the scenes of that process? Like, you would have a music meeting, you would have record people come in, you'd say you had in a typical week, what would you be looking at and how would you decide what was great?
Before you answer, I have a guess.
God.
I want to guess.
All right, Joe wants to guess.
I think the way it went was we'd play a record and Steve would say, "Are they from Seattle?" And they'd say no, and he'd get a little disappointed and he'd say, "Are they from Canada?" And he'd say yes. He'd go, add that record. Oh.
We did have a Canadian program director. Yes.
You're 80% right. You're actually I think it's really important to before we get to like the digital age of YouTube and online and digital days, KISW had a reputation, a very strong global reputation of breaking bands before I even entered the building. Slayton himself is credited for playing AC/DC because they didn't have a deal in the US. He found them at an import bin at a Fred Meyer music market. He was one of the first to play Metallica. We broke Queensryche. So there is a legacy that started in the 70s that I inherited when I sat in Steve Slayton's music director seat. And I looked and found that the day that I took the job was on the day that Nevermind came out. I was assistant music director for 3 years before that, but I took the job when Nevermind came out. So a lot of this.
Okay, new music director, what do you have? How about Nevermind? All right. You keep the job.
So I think that's important to note that
amen.
Seattle, the Seattle music scene also gave this what's going on there, who are the stations there that we need to watch. And there was a service called, I think at the time it was called BDS, that some poor intern was getting paid $2 an hour to monitor radio stations live and write down what was being played. I would get many phone calls at night going, "What was that song that you guys played? I don't know what that is."
Pre-computers.
Pre-computers.
Child labor. She was 13, this girl who wrote down these songs.
Right?
Yeah.
So, got paid in albums.
So other radio stations were watching when we started playing something. It's like, what's KISW doing? And if we played it enough or long enough, we could get 25, 30, 50 radio stations just to start playing it just because we did.
Yeah.
And I was a listener at that time and a kid like Cathy. And I remember the only place you could get the new Queensryche EP when they came out was a record store in kind of Bellevue, Redmond in between.
Yep.
That's the only place in the world you could go buy this 4-song EP. The only place you could get AC/DC, Let There Be Rock, was at Tower Records in the import section. And the only reason I even knew it existed was from Steve Slayton, but you had to go buy the Australian version. And that KISW is where I heard all this stuff first. And
we all have people who impressed us and that we mentored off of. And it is so cool to hear the Steve Slayton part of the story from you. Because I vaguely recall hearing about him in AC/DC, and I think that's a little bit lost to history.
I have a vinyl recording. One of the first things that I got to do as his intern is do research on AC/DC. because he and Bo Phillips, who was the program director at the time, got to go down to Los Angeles and interview AC/DC, and it was put on a vinyl record and sent out to all the radio stations in the United States. And I'm like, I can't stump you on the radio. I can't stump Slayton. So I don't know why you need me to research this band that you're breaking, but I feel really honored.
I do
So
think sometimes he was whispered the answers. I'm just saying.
I
I don't
know.
want to.
Well,
Let's not go there.
no, he's that College of Rock and Roll knowledge.
A legend. Absolutely.
Nobody can stump Slayton.
So
So the music meeting process is every label, for the most part, had a rep in Seattle. That is also a lost art form. And on a particular day, they would come in, and it was almost like, the singing, bow tie salesman ready to tap dance in front of you to tell you how wonderful this record was. And I was getting worked everything, from, hey, Slash is on the Prince single, you need to play Prince now on KISW, to, Michael Jackson and Janet Jackson have a rockin' song that it rocks, so you need to play it. Okay, that's debatable, but okay, well, thank you.
sure, thank you.
And so at the end of the week, I would have 30 projects that were high priority, and we would maybe add one.
Wow.
KISW notoriously from day one has been known to go very deep musically into artists, where we would rather play another song off of a record than to play a bunch of little dabblings with a bunch of different artists. So we would rather play 8 songs off the Alice in Chains Facelift record than, just one song and, pound it to death. So
Did you think, by the way, at the time, because we were doing it, that you were, that you had discovered a fantastic, and I hate to use this word, it's almost like a dirty word, but a brand, you'd had discovered a fantastic artist, and it was better to go deep on that artist than have a bunch of different artists? Did you think about the marketing of it, or was it just, that's where the
no,
songs led you?
I think between 1990 and 1992, I was a proud big sister, and these are bands from the area, and they're getting a shot, and anything that we could do to help them. Seattle, KISW had always been known to embrace local music. People debate on how much corporate radio can or cannot, with a specialty show on the weekend, but we always would play local music. Evenings we would take a lot more chances, and we would support local artists on national tours that were coming through. Like,
So you weren't thinking
Queensryche
about
opened for Zebra.
Yeah, you weren't thinking
in
about the
83.
business. It was about friends and family
Yeah.
who are artists. Okay.
Then in the later time, within the music meeting aspect, it would take a record, like, say, for example, Hunger Strike by Temple of the Dog, as an example, because I think this was the example on the podcast you listened to.
Yep.
We played the record when it came out, before the sound had exploded globally. And then a year and a half later, A&M re-released the record because Pearl Jam had gone platinum. And they wanted us to play this new single called Hunger Strike. And we had already played it for a year and a half. So while I have to play it so that other radio stations around the country will see that it's on my playlist, because if it's from Seattle and we're not playing it, that's a problem also. But I also have been playing it for a year and a half for our local audience, and they're like, there's more than that song on the record. So we would play Pushing Forward Back, or we would play All Night Thing, or, there would be, we would definitely find a way to package it so that the rest of the country saw we were playing what the label wanted us to play.
Right. You had to play ball.
Yeah, but on the same, and I felt it served the bands as well as us.
Oh yeah.
Because it gave them the national endorsement, if you will. So
Did you ever really piss off a record label by refusing to play something? And were you ever wrong, or pick the one that where you were right?
What did you pass on? What did you say? Nah, we're not going to add that.
That's a great question.
Oh God, I had fights. I swore a lot. I stood up and down. This little girl in radio said, "Hell no, we will not play Hole."
Oh, great example, by the way. Perfect.
And
You've got the right audience for not playing whole here.
Oh, I caught so much crap nationally from
Mm.
the management to the label, and how could you not? And I'm like, I can tell you exactly why not. And this is why not. So thank you and good day, sir.
We'll put the Screaming Cheetah Wheelies into active hot rotation, but we're not playing whole. There you go.
Oh, you were right about that one.
We still
There's
play
no
this-
there's no enduring whole tracks that are classic anywhere.
Well, they had their place. I didn't believe, and we can make personal comments about members of the band, and that's not where I was going. I mentioned earlier that the end had their lane, and there were bands that fit on the end that I didn't believe fit on KISW.
And that would a couple of those songs fit. Yeah.
Yeah, and that entire album, in and of itself, was brilliant. Didn't think it belonged here.
It's a different kind of edgy. It was a different
I drew
sound.
that line.
Yeah.
No, it was alternative. KISW was not by nature alternative, and the end was, you know, it all kind of melded together. And
right,
30 years later, all the stations are playing Hunger Strike several times a week, and they're playing all
and
that
at the
stuff.
At the time I was fighting over whole, we were fighting over everything. If I started playing something, the end would fight. I mean, before we were kind brethren, we were fighting tooth and nail for everything, which to me is just so sophomoric and the business of radio in a competitive radio market. However, for the local music scene, I think it did a huge disservice, and it was so freaking juvenile. And if I could go back and do anything differently, I tried to go high when they were going low, and there were some times where we had to play hardball, and the bands were the commodity, and it was not a fun time.
We were all juveniles for the most part, so I guess that makes sense. It was younger, and younger days.
All right, I'm going to press my luck with one other angle on this type of question. This is like that in the artist studio kind of interview where, what's the one thing, what's this, what's that? If you had to pick one, either track or band that you championed that was an uphill climb that turned out to be hugely successful, that you feel, I know you're not going to take credit because you're not that type of person, but that you feel personally glad that you championed? Take your time.
Why do I have to pick one? I would have this fight with my son all the time.
Oh yeah, you have five. All right, pick five.
Yeah. Okay. I treasure every moment I got to work with Pearl Jam. I treasure every moment I got to work with Alice in Chains. And 35 years later, or whatever the time is, Joe, it sounds like a no-brainer, but it wasn't easy.
At the time.
Yeah. It was a very different beast, and a lot of people didn't understand the sound. So I spent a lot of time advocating. There were two bands that I worked with that didn't make the top 5. I loved working with Grunt Truck. I truly, truly enjoyed working with them. I truly enjoyed working with Second Coming. I truly loved working with Sweetwater and Candlebox. And my personal favorite was Brad and Mad Season, like the side projects, all the collaborations when people would get together and do this one-off piece of musical magic. I loved it. I loved saying, yeah, they work together. We have this whole other album. No, I know it doesn't make sense. No, it's not a band, but we have this one-off project. It's fabulous.
And going back to the Canadian thing, I know this isn't Seattle, but if it weren't for you and Steve, I would have never heard of the Tea Party, and most of America would not have either. I would have probably never heard. You got it right behind you. Yeah. I would have never heard of the Tragically Hip. Now they are in Canada. They are as big as Canadian bacon, or what? I guess Canadian bacon is not that big in Canada. Maybe maple syrup there.
It's bigger. Canadian bacon is actually bigger here. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. But they're the biggest band in Canada, but they never really crossed the border except to KISW. And Tragically Hip, I think, is one of the greatest rock and roll bands ever of any generation ever. And
that's not exclusive to us. I mean, I appreciate the compliments, and I know if Steve were here, we miss him daily. he would be flattered as well. But what we would tell you is, in the day of analog radio, Vancouver fans listened to KISW just as passionately as Seattle fans did. So we were the home for Rush, and there were bands that worked in Seattle because we were a quote unquote a border town. Detroit also had a lot of similarities where they would have Canadian artists that would work there very
That's
well, like
true.
here, but
I
wouldn't
remember
work well
seeing
in.
Rush with Max Webster at the arena, and everybody was like, "Who's Rush? Who's Max Webster?" These are
Oh, yeah.
Canadian bands, and trust me, they're good, and they were obviously
Yeah.
great. And UFO was on that bill too, but Rush wasn't touring the U.S. They just happened to pop down to Seattle.
All right. So
Right.
a lot of water under the bridge. A lot of time has gone by. I learned a few things tonight. I learned that I learned Steve Slayton's heritage, which I already knew, but I learned another depth part of it. And I learned that Spike, when he first got to Seattle, used to stay out till 2 a.m. watching Alice in Chains, and that,
And still could be so quick in the morning. How did you do
and
that?
still we're still funny. So I don't give a shit.
Because the coffee here wasn't like anything I'd ever seen in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I was raised on Maxwell House and got here to Surreal Espresso, and
right.
life was different.
Speaking
This thing goes to 11.
Speaking of Surreal Espresso, I don't know if we're going to get anything good and juicy out of him, because he's a high school teacher now and a mentor to future radio stars, media stars, because media is media. Joe, what story back from that era can you tell us? Did you go out late at night and have a awesome experience? Did you get to see something you can share with us?
Well, yeah, I saw and heard a lot, but like I mentioned, my focus really was when I got vacation. I went to San Francisco. I saw every Grateful Dead New Year's show in the 80s and 90s, and that was my deal. But Spike was smart to take in as much as he did, because like Damon would invite me to shows, and I remember going to the Central and with Damon, and I'm going, I am so excited for you to see Little Women. They are the greatest band. They were a band called Little Women. I thought they were great. He goes, well, actually, I'm here to see the opener, Widespread Panic. I'm checking them out. Maybe we'll sign them. Well, Widespread Panic is still packing stadiums today. I mean, they've been touring forever, but I remember that show. I remember Nicole Vandenberg bringing me out into her car and said, you need to hear this. She puts in a cassette, and it's Mookie Blaylock, and she's banging her head. And I'm like, yeah, okay, that sounds pretty good to me. But, it didn't seem, I feel like it all was a little bit over my head. I mean,
at the time,
I went to Pearl Jam when they played the off ramp. I'm not sure if that was their first show or not. You were there, Bob. It was one of
I did go to the off ramp
early shows.
And it's an interesting story because it was early in the evening, I believe. It was not late at night, and it was a special. They were packing Pearl Jam into this bar that fit 80 to 100 people comfortably, maybe.
Nobody was comfortable in that room.
It was
no one.
No. And I remember thinking, well, I'm a morning guy, but I could stay up for this, to like 6:30 or whenever it started. I don't remember, maybe it was 8 o'clock. But and I actually asked, can I get in? And back in those days, if you like today, if you're in radio and you want to get into something exclusive, not as easy. But back in those days, you worked at KSW and you wanted to get in, and there were only going to be 80 or 100. I think they fit 300 people in that day. But I got in, and I'm pressed up against the stage because it was really just this long corridor. And Eddie Van Halen came out, and I guess he was
or Vedder.
Did I say Eddie Van Halen? I meant Eddie Vedder. Eddie Van Vedder. That
would have been
I
really
don't remember
Joe,
that happening.
Pass me the Prevagen, Joe. That's all right. I love these senior moments. So Eddie Vedder came out, and like you, Joe, to me it was all a little surreal. Because I was mornings, I didn't feel so much a part of it. I would historically later see it bigger than I did then. But Eddie Vedder came out, and that week he was on the cover of Time magazine. And if my memory serves me correctly, and he walked out. I can't remember if he had a picture, if he had the Time magazine cover or not, but he came out and he said, I wiped my ass with the cover of Time magazine. Does anybody remember hearing him say that?
Mm-hmm.
I know we put it in a song lyric years later.
Yeah. Yeah, the off-ramp show you're referring to is probably a surprise show when they were trying material for Verses. It was after the Mookie Blaylock days,
Okay.
because the Time magazine came out on the eve of the release of Verses, and both Kurt and Eddie, no, they did not want to be on the cover, and Time chose Eddie anyway.
Meanwhile, Donald Trump is printing up phony covers of Time magazine with him on the cover. Like, it is, how cool is it to say, I don't want to be on the cover of Time magazine? Well, I was not a Seattleite yet. I was a newcomer from out of town. And I thought this guy, Eddie Vedder, was being rude. I actually thought, I didn't think, oh, how cool that is. I thought, you're biting the hand that feeds you, and that's not good. And so later, it may have been a year or two later, there was a show down on the waterfront. And I believe it was like an MTV Unplugged or something. And it was supposed to be Nirvana and Pearl Jam.
And Cypress Hill.
And I was at that
right,
one too.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Okay.
I was there too.
And Pearl Jam canceled. While we were waiting, and it was another situation where, because I work at KISW, I got tickets to see this. It's a big deal. It's going to be on MTV. Pearl Jam, Eddie Vedder, this guy who I was starting to think of was a bit irresponsible. He cancels. No Pearl Jam. I'm a little pissed off. And we go in, and and Nirvana plays a set. I believe that was right when In Utero came out.
Yeah, they had that angel or that mannequin on stage.
Anyway, I'm just going to embarrass myself, self-deprecate a little bit, and I'd say, I remember thinking to myself, this Eddie Vedder is a flash in the pan, but this Kurt Cobain, he did a great job tonight. I think he's got a long future ahead of him.
What a responsible young man.
Yes, what a responsible young man.
That show, I agree, though. I was going there to see Pearl Jam, and the word got
Me
out
too.
as we were
Yep.
standing in line, and that's the only time I saw Nirvana ever, and it was great. And I came out of there a much bigger Nirvana fan than I walked in. I thought that was one heck of a rock show. And
It was amazing.
I really enjoyed that.
Cathy, did you ever get into the recording studio to watch one of these bands track anything?
Yeah, it's kind of funny that you asked that question. One of my biggest memories was when Pearl Jam was finishing 10, and I would get off the air at 2 in the morning, and the band would still be recording. And all I remember, this is 30 years. So all I remember is I would
Selective memory is good at this point.
Yeah, it's one of my treasured memories is I would sit on the couch, and it was 2 in the morning, and I was exhausted because I went to college too during the day, and then I did my air shift. So I'd sit down, I'm like, okay, they're listening to the tracks and they're playing it over and over. Okay, I'll lean.
Oh no.
And I would fall asleep, on the couch, and I would wake up when they would leave. And so when I heard the record, it's like, God, that sounds so familiar.
You were dreaming that.
I was like dreaming that, or did that really happen? Was I there? Wow. So I slept through a lot of the recording process, but in hindsight, I'm so glad I was there. But I slept through most of it.
Was that London Bridge?
London Bridge, yeah.
Yeah, where 10 was recorded. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I did a tour. I did a tour of the place recently. I said, "Oh, is this the couch? Did I sleep on this couch? Oh, please, God, tell me you got a new couch."
Yeah, or Scott's guarded it anyway.
I know, right?
That's so funny. Wow. Yeah, and Cathy would, for those of you who remember Live at Bob's Garage, Cathy would arrange for bands to come and do 1, 2, or 3 song sets for the morning show, and some of the names she mentioned, like Second Coming, came out and recorded. But really,
Queensryche did a great one.
Queensryche was awesome.
Queens of the Stone Age. I mean,
really Queens of the Stone Age.
By the way, they recorded outside Queensryche because they wanted a live feel. And so instead of being in the basement, which was really my studio, we called it Bob's Garage because it started in a garage, but it ended up being a basement studio. Anyway, they wanted to play outside. And if you listen to that Silent Lucidity track, you can hear the birds singing.
Yeah.
These were not sound effects. Real birds.
And still to this day, Bob, one of my favorite tracks to come out of Bob's Garage was Melvin's version of Revolve.
Oh, yeah.
That is...
Are you ready, Ben? Ready.
Yeah. Ready.
All that stuff, by the way, is at bobrivers.com, and we don't get a nickel for any of it. But if you want to hear some of those
magical moment.
And
Bob's
there's at
garage
least
recordings,
one
yeah.
radio station you can still hear that. It's a high school station. We play that Melvin's track.
No
Do
kidding.
you?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Awesome.
That's funny.
A lot of that stuff lives on at KMIH. We play something from
Love it.
Seattle every hour, and we always, or from the Northwest, but some of that best Bob's Garage stuff is part of what we play.
All right.
And a couple other things I will say, if you want quick memories, the most rock star moment ever, maybe. And we had the KISW Flies reunion a few weeks ago, which was just brought back a flood of memories. But I remember after a Flies game going to Spike and Rockfish's apartment, and it was most of the guys from Alice in Chains were there. I don't remember who all was there, but somebody got the idea that jumping off the balcony in the pool was the thing to do. Was that you? That was like, okay, somebody's going to die here, and it wasn't going to be me. I sure wasn't doing it, but I was trying to kind of discourage it. But that's when I realized, okay, this is a power beyond reason. These people are doing something different here. And then
somebody got video of some of that.
We Rockfish and I lived in this third floor apartment with a built-in pool below, and he and I have been jumping off that deck for a whole summer. And we did the KSW Flies, played the Fly Swatters, which we did annually. And coming back to the apartment that day, the guys from Alice, guys from Soundgarden were there. Kim was there. Sean was there. My sister's Machine, Metal Church.
Sweetwater was there.
Sweetwater was there. What was Tommy Gunn's band? Was that
War Babies.
Bathtub Gin? War Babies.
Oh,
right,
War
right.
Babies. We'll love that band.
So these guys were all jumping off this third floor balcony into the pool, and somebody had one of those old camcorders, and we got a picture of Lane putting on Rockfish's football helmet from his junior high football team and jumping off the third floor deck into the pool. And I got to give that video to his mom after we lost Lane at a tribute show over there on Capitol Hill.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was some great stuff. But and let me close. We talked about with memories. I remember the 10 release party. And was it Rock Candy?
The 10 release party was at Club Oz, which was
Oz, right.
Which was across the street from the Mural Amphitheater, because they played at the Mural Amphitheater and then crossed the street over.
And our American friend Rick the Bouncer worked at Club Oz as a bouncer. Right. That's how we met him. Okay.
But the reason I bring it up is because Cathy talked about being a big sister to these bands, and seeing the pride you had at that party for those guys, and the love you had for those guys, and not just those guys, but from Queensryche to Alice, to you name it, everybody, you cared and you fought for those guys. And in hindsight, it was like you had the world handed to you. You handed the world Seattle, and I mean that with all my heart. You fought tooth and nail for those guys, and you led the charge that took that shit around the world.
All right. While we're pouring maple syrup and butter on her, I'm gonna do.
I love you, man.
Yeah, you're right, Spike. I'm going to do the other half of this, the behind the scenes, which Cathy might dispute some of my interpretation of this. But when Entercom bought KISW and Steve Young headed to New York, where he almost briefly was at WNEW, and I believe he went back into consulting. He came back. Did he come back to Seattle? Yeah. Anyway, for a period there, we had only an acting program director, who was Cathy Faulkner. Interim. I hate the word interim, but every great job I got started as interim. So, here we now were part of a group of radio stations, and we knew the Bob, Spike, and Joe chemistry was there. We knew that to be a really successful morning show, you couldn't play 8 records an hour. You had to, morph towards, if not all the way to talk, but talk morning shows that were funny were very successful. And I had asked Steve Young, could I do this for years? And he said, no, it wouldn't fit the needs of the radio station because we're in a 3-way battle with these other music stations. One was AAA, one was alternative, and then we're the rock lane. And if we surrender the music position in the morning, they could make some music adjustments. And
he was right.
He was totally right. Yeah. I know. But when he left, and like all of a sudden he said to me as he was leaving, you're going to get to do that talk show thing now. Like he literally was saying, the situation has changed in the market. We're sister stations. So losing a few people to this station while you grow this big brand actually makes more marketing sense than being direct competitors. So, but it was Cathy that he left in charge. And it was Cathy that I remember coming up to me, and I remember, and we didn't see each other much because of our different opposite parts of the time clock.
You
But I
each
remember
got a 7 o'clock. You got the first and she got the second.
I got the first 7 o'clock. She got the evening 7 o'clock.
Right.
But I remember talking to her about, I think we were going to talk more and play less music. And Cathy would say to me, "You tell me how many songs you want to put in there, and we'll put them in there." And we went from like, I don't know, 8 to 6. And I remember
I
when
think
we
you ended
went,
up with 4.
it
4
was
with a couple
4.
extras.
Yeah, and it was 4. And I kept thinking we're going to get busted. We're going to be thrown off the air. We're going to have a horrible rating period. Cathy has since reminded me that it did depend on the ratings, and the ratings stayed good. So we were given that rope, but she was the boss technically.
Well, I guess my only request to you, Bob, was occasionally I'll have to ask you a few uncomfortable things to do during your show. Please understand there's a bigger picture at play, and I am interim. So if I ask, please.
I don't remember anything uncomfortable. I remember feeling like you had our back, but you have told me you were implementing what was good strategy. You were,
Yeah, like you, I had a conversation with Steve Young. He did not have, part of the reason we knew the station was up for sale is that usually his contract took 30 seconds to renew, and we were on 3 weeks. And so we knew it was coming. So we started doing different strategies of, what if this company purchases us, or if this company purchases us, where are we headed? And we already knew that the fall was going to be one of the best ratings books, because coming off of summer, KISW always does well because we have this hydroplane that blows up and everybody listens to us when our hydroplane blows up. But the fall book was going to be one of the best we had in like a decade. And so we knew it was in momentum. We could all stop and things would still be good.
I remember doing I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was going to say, I remember doing
she's describing why we got a little bit of leash.
Well,
it
was the uncomfortable part I heard. And I do remember doing some things with Ronald McDonald I felt were a little uncomfortable, but I didn't ever question. But I did wonder, why am I out with this clown all over the place? And that was about that time, so I think to get a little leash, you gotta pay a few bills too.
Well, and it wasn't all support, because management for the new company in another building across town wasn't really hip to much of this. And there was this guy, G. Michael Donovan, who ran the Mountain. And he was a pleasant enough guy, but we were former enemies, and he had no idea that we were dropping music, or so he said. And what had happened is we'd gotten down to 2 songs, and then we were doing hours with no songs. And this was maybe a little later, 6 months, a year later, and I was sweating when the ratings would come out. Are Bob, Spike, and Joe funny enough to hold the audience without the records that will start, at 10 a.m. when Wilkie comes on? And I remember that I got hauled into the office with Clark Ryan, our program director.
Yeah.
And G. Michael Donovan was interrogating us about, why we needed so many people on the morning show. He wanted to can Joe.
Yeah.
And I said, well, it's an entertainment morning show. He goes, you're playing records. You don't need 5 people to play records. And I remember looking at him and going, he doesn't know we're not playing records. And so I actually told him, which made Clark Ryan uncomfortable.
Yep.
Because we were all...
Clark hadn't told him either.
And I know we were following the master plan of doing great things, but we didn't have support all the way up to Philadelphia. We didn't have any support in Philadelphia. So anyway, he threatened to fire Joe. It's a long story, which I've told a couple of times. But the cool part of it was that right about the time they were talking about firing Joe, and I actually did, I'll virtue signal here. I said, if you want to fire someone, fire me. I'm not losing Joe. I just knew that he and Spike were the magic trio. And so he said, "Well, I'll have to think about it. I have to talk to my boss," which was David Field. And that Friday, the ratings came out, and for the first time ever, I think we were, number 1 or 2, 25-54. It
You were
was,
number one.
yeah. Well, and we did
Full
get to
on.
for number one for a long time. So the ratings were so good that they had offered me to like take a pay cut or something, and I said, "Well, let me think about it, and I'll talk to my boss, which was my wife, Lisa." And a week after the ratings, Clark, did you think about that proposal to modify the budget so that we could keep Joe? I said, I did, and I don't really want to do it. I said, so ask him if he wants to fire me. And I never heard another thing. And that's how close our show came to sort of not happening, just because of that. These stations were all merging together. And so, yes, I fondly remember you, Cathy, as being our champion, and you remember yourself as just doing the best job you can, doing the
A
right
lot
thing.
of it was, oh, you need that information of what they played? Oh, I'll get that to you. And
Yeah, get that to you later. Yeah.
somehow that just didn't happen.
I'll get back to you.
And the
yeah.
part I remember is after Bob basically put his neck out on the line for me, and my job was saved. About a month later, I go to Clark and say, "I'm going to have to quit if I don't get a raise because I'm going to be a dad and I got to go sell real estate." So poor Clark, he couldn't afford to keep me, and now he's going to have to pay to go to the boss and say, "We got to give this kid a $20,000 raise or he's going to leave." And he did that too, and he got it figured out. So
once you have the ratings and it's predictable and you've done the kind of job that everyone on this Brady Bunch window that we're looking at right now has done, you would get the respect. You didn't get the respect until you earned it, I think.
Yeah, and I think the thing that's different back then that doesn't happen in mergers and acquisitions nowadays is there was a 3 to 6 month period before they made those decisions where they got to know us. They did. I don't know how much they understood about us. I was defending songs that we were playing, like, why are we playing Soul Stripper by AC/DC? It's like, well, there's this story about AC/DC. So it's like, let me tell you why we're doing it and why the Northwest is different than Philadelphia, or why, why Austin has a different music scene than Seattle. And we went through every song list. Nowadays, you don't have that get acquainted time.
No, and nowadays we are all Borg programmed from. Are we like without trashing anybody now because we're not that type of person? But what is it like now? Well, you are that type of person. But what? Look, it's way different now because there's lots of debt and there's tons of competition from the internet. So radio has to, in some ways, be even safer than ever before, in order to survive. But what's the music scene? Is there a music scene? And granted, we're older now, so we're not in that age, that teens to young 30s age where the greatest music of your life is made. Cathy, what are your thoughts about music
I was
today?
Did you notice I had my head down that you were
Please don't come to me on this one. Yeah. You don't have to be big sweeping, just a few thoughts. Like, even if you say, do you have favorite bands that are making it now that we should all Google and YouTube, or what does it look like to you now?
I think the biggest challenge for radio is that it lost its relevancy years ago. And the age group that you were talking about, when we were young and in the 90s, developing a music scene in Seattle, we were younger and we were passionate about radio and going to clubs. The audience is in a different place. They're on their PS5, they're on their Xbox. And so if you want to reach them musically, you go where they are. Or if you are a radio company that bean counters are wondering how to flush out the budget, make it relevant and make it relevant so that they'll come back.
So back to this young person, and I love how you went towards gamers, because there's a lot of innovation in gamers. In fact, I think the role of DJ is now a guy or some women as well, but letting you watch them master a video game, that's a disc jockey. That's someone in a studio entertaining you on Twitch. And
Yeah.
and if someone, and I run into people, I teach some podcasting classes at a nonprofit, and I run into 19, 20, 25-year-olds who like they just wish they could be DJs. I want to do a show on YouTube where I expose new music and talk about the ones that are really good. But you can't, because the music licensing, you'll be flagged for copyright infringement. So there is no farm club for curators like you were to when they're in their
And
teens.
it's snippets. It's
Yeah.
snippets.
You can only play a snippet now. Yes.
Yeah, my son taught me a lot about how teens, and I'm sure Joe and Spike, your kids as well. Well, they're not kids anymore. But
my 40-year-old kids, yes.
I know. My son taught me a lot about how he discovered music, and it was YouTube memes to start, and that's how he got acquainted with Alan White and Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was one of the first songs he got attracted to, and then he's like, "Well, I want to do that, and I want to use that song." And I said, "Well, if you're going to use that song, you have to ask Alan White's permission." And he's like, "Well, he won't know." And I go, "Well, actually,
the algorithm will know.
Let's take a drive, and he will know, because you're going to ask his permission." And that's
in person. Oh, no kidding. You took him to Alan White's. That's so cool.
I took him to Alan White's. So,
I mean, the kids have such short attention spans. You want to see a teenager's head explode? Show them an 8-minute song on their music log on their show. It's like 8 minutes. I mean, they don't even listen to a whole song. They'll listen to a minute, then they'll go to the next one.
So
Trevor complained that Smells Like Teen Spirit was too long at 5 something. Yeah.
Exactly. But there's still stuff out there, and I'm a believer that it's going to keep coming. There's a band my daughter just sent me, Pantsuit Guy, out of Bellingham, and it's a girl band called Pantsuit Guy. They're pretty good. Right here on Mercer Island, Naked Giants. They've been around for a few years now, but they're really good. I mean,
I think, Joe, that it's out there. I think that
it's totally.
I think there is more music out there than ever before. And I think the young Led Zeppelins or AC/DCs or Beatles or whatever they all are, the problem is they don't have even a way to be starving artists, much less make a living, much less clubs to play at night, much less music curators and record A&R guys who are looking for them. And
I think it's a different avenue, Bob.
It's algorithms, right? I
mean, if any girl can make $1 million on OnlyFans, which blows my mind, they brought porn to the mainstream and put the money in the women's hands instead of the Dirk Digglers of the world. I think we should be only bands, where we start like an OnlyFans type service where bands get to monetize themselves to their audience.
I think you're right. I think actually one of the existing platforms, it could be Spotify, it could be Google, could be YouTube, could be SiriusXM, should actually create a farm club for weekend and overnight type people that could do their own radio shows for free.
Oh, great.
Here's the software. Here's the music library, which we pay. You go out and attract an audience. And then, just because that's the business model of social media now. We all work for free for Jeff Zuckerberg and TikTok. And although Facebook, I saw the greatest line in Ted Lasso last week. It was, I'm not interested in Facebook. That's just for grandparents and racists now.
Oh,
biting sarcasm.
So true, it hurts.
Yes.
I know. Wow.
So, all right. Well, fascinating. We've said a lot. We've reminisced for a good deal over an hour now. How should we wrap this up?
Well, since AI is going to replace us all in 6 months anyway, let's just thank the Lord for the time we've had together.
Yeah.
Does that mean that we have to talk to each other in monotone? It has been
I know.
a wonderful time visiting with you today.
We did a CBS top of the hour news update today, and I would bet my house that the guy doing the CBS hourly news update was AI. Oh. There's no way this guy's diction and delivery was that good.
Did people not know about Skynet?
I know. I said that none of you guys saw Terminator but me. Are you kidding?
Skynet?
Well, I know who does the CBS Evening News voiceover, and it's not AI. It's a guy named Carson Beck, and he's from Mercer Island. He was a kid. And when you hear the CBS Evening News, if you'd like to know more, go to our podcasts. That's a kid named Carson, not a kid anymore, but
Yeah.
he's pretty good.
Yeah.
He does a lot of the CBS stuff.
Well, we
By the
are.
way, I'm coming to your work tomorrow, Spike. I'll be down there. I'll see you at Bonneville, or I won't see you.
Oh, right on. Are
I'll
they
see
hiring you too?
Well,
Good.
I'm going to the human resources department, but no, not to be hired.
Oh,
They want my kids. They don't want me. They want young people to replace people like me and you. So
Maren, our HR director, is a wonderful, wonderful
Yeah.
person. You're gonna love her.
she is. Yeah, we're
Yeah.
going to talk about internship opportunities and
They're
stuff.
blessed to have you, Spike, but I think you're one of the
Yeah.
last Bidens to get in there. I think they're all going to be younger people now, 40s and 30-year-olds. And we're like the old white guys, last hurrah. You are awesome, by the way. You are sounding so good on the radio. So
Thanks.
good. Yes.
They're
But if
letting me.
they
They're letting me
wanted to
be
hire me-
myself.
Yeah, they are.
Joe, tell you what. Nate's working there. Nate Connors is working there.
Yep.
It's amazing how many people that other companies have tossed aside because they got too accomplished in their lives that Bonneville still sees value. It's pretty
Well, the
amazing.
good news for me is summer's coming, and I got some time on my hands. So if you
Yeah.
got a project that you need some help with, maybe you never know.
Yeah.
Tell them to give
I mean-
Bob, Spike, and Joe a half hour at the latest time, when nobody would care, and let's just get on there and have some fun or something.
Mhm. And Bonneville is seriously a great company, and they see first off, they don't have debt. They're not speaking to lenders, and they see the long range future of developing talent, much like, the good old days. They're still there. So I think it's wonderful that you're there. And Joe,
Thanks.
you're doing amazing work, and I'm sitting.
Yeah, you are, brother. I'm
Yeah.
proud of you, man.
I'll tell you a bit too. I will end with this, because if you guys aren't watching the Seattle Kraken, you're missing out on something here. The whole city is on fire. The only problem is I don't know anything about hockey, so I think the whole city needs hockey lessons. And
Yeah.
I found somebody to give them. In fact, he's coming down here. We've got a playoff soccer game we're going to broadcast here in a bit. But I got Kraken Max. He's a 7th grader, and he's teaching me how to watch hockey, and he is great.
Love it.
This kid is a natural, and he's a 7th grader now, going into 8th grade. He's not even going to be in my program for a couple of years, but he meets me at 7 a.m. to recap the Kraken games, and I think that's a good bit for KIRO or any station. You got to teach this city what hockey is. What's a blue line? What's icing?
Hockey
What is all this
101.
business?
I love this.
Yeah, that's a bit. We bring Cracking Max down to KIRO. I mean, you should really, this city needs to be educated. Nobody knows what the heck hockey is, but we all love a winner, and we got a winner right now. So we got to get up to speed on how to root for them.
Beautiful.
Good stuff. Joe, your students are the future. They're going to do that. I do want to say this, Mother's Day is coming up. Cathy, I want to wish you a happy Mother's Day. Joe, you said you had something figured out for Mother's Day?
Well, I don't have too much figured out, except that I got a lot of mothers to spread around my time. My mom's in Tucson, and it's a blessing to have a lot of mothers. I have my wife, and then I have my stepmom. But I did think of something today that accomplished a lot of things at once.
Okay. Is this a
my
tip we
kids
can all use?
I think so.
right.
Maybe.
Kathy, cover your ears because we might have Nell surprise you. Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
no. This is my
Okay.
kids were. One kid said, what would be neat is if we recorded something for our moms and put it on the radio. And I said, that's wonderful. I will give anybody 10 points on your card if you produce a wonderful Mother's Day greeting. I said, but not just for the grade. Think about this. Your mom is going to get the most unique gift she's ever had. It's a lot better than a card. It's you expressing your love for your mom. You're probably going to get a little bump in your allowance, and you're going to score tons of points, and you're going to get a grade, and you're going to make our radio station sound great. So lo and behold, within an hour, I had a dozen, and then now tomorrow I'll get a dozen more. So these kids are going to make our Mother's Day programming sound better than any radio station. They're going to help their grade. They're going to score points with their mom. And it's one less assignment for me to have to think of. And I thought it was a win all the way around.
Yeah. Genius move.
Well done.
And I'm going to do something like that for Lisa, but I'll probably put it on Facebook because if I put it in this podcast, she'll never find it. It's awesome.
My wife will. She listens to every minute of you, whether I'm on here or not. She's your
You told
biggest
me
fan.
she's a fan. That means a lot to me.
She
she's a
loves
sweetheart.
your Bob and Zip. She loves that. She doesn't ever miss an episode.
Awesome. Well, tell her thank you for me. Thank you, Spike, and the late Cathy Faulkner. You've
Thanks for the
been
invitation.
well. You've been a tremendous person and a wonderful friend for this past year, and super important decades ago. So this is a pleasure. I want to tell you folks about a podcast where you can hear Cathy get even deeper into this. What was that show called? So they can Google it.
Is this Sound Off?
Sound
Podcast?
Off with what was the guy's name?
Matt Cadell.
Matt Cadell.
Matt.
Okay, I'll have Dave put a link so you can check that out. It's even more in depth about if you're really a Seattle music, fan and you want to hear even more. That's going to do it for us today. We try to get together every week or two, Bob, Spike, and Joe, and reminisce. Or I'm glad today we didn't talk about old white guy politics and stuff because
I'm all talked out. I did it all afternoon.
I know
We'll
it's
do it
all
again
rerun.
tomorrow.
Yeah, you've already gave it
Do
the
for a
office.
living. It takes
All right.
the fun out of it to come and do it on a podcast, probably.
All right. Well, Cathy, bless you. Thank you so much for being on with us.
Thank you. Thanks for
Cathy
having me.
Faulkner.
Okay.
All right. Spike and Joe, was that fun?
Wonderful. My dogs liked it.
Your dog is a huge fan of the late Cathy Faulkner. All right. And Joe, mentor to future media stars. Again, of all of us, I think you're doing the most important work.
Well, in
Amen.
13 minutes, we've got a live soccer broadcast. We got dueling playoff games at 7 o'clock. We got soccer. We also have a baseball playoff. And unfortunately, we can only broadcast one. We have one radio station, but I'll be here at 10 o'clock tonight. And I got here at 7 this morning to meet Crack and Max, and that's my day every day. But I love it. If you do something, by the way, I don't know how much of this you're going to keep, but I got a great guest for you too. Either one of you.
We don't have to edit you out. We're not coming up to commercials or news time or anything. Keep going.
This lady is
Top of the hour.
she is a creativity coach, and she teaches you about creativity. She's got a new book coming out about kids and how to unleash their creativity. But she came and talked to my kids, and one thing she said is, you never burn out on doing something you love. Because people ask me, you work too hard, you work too many hours, where do you get the energy? I love what I do. You never burn out on that. So, but I'll connect you, Bob. You two would hit it off totally. She's got a new book out. She had the last one was a bestseller,
Please
and
forward
it's all about making you more creative. So
I love that. And I don't need to learn about hockey because I'm not in Seattle, but I need to learn about baseball because the Oakland Athletics are soon going to be the Las Vegas Athletics. Is that right?
Oh, and I can't wait to come visit you when the Mariners are in town. That's going to be wonderful.
When Lisa and I moved to Las Vegas, exactly. I thought it might be a dog move, but what made it convincing for this time in our lives, there were a couple of things. We love entertainment, so I want to go see concerts any night of the week. We could do that. I like hiking and desert hiking. You get to do 10 months out of the year. But also, I said to Lisa, every week people are going to be coming to Las Vegas because it's a tourist town. And we're going to get to see friends and family and people that we love, and they're going to fly. And that has happened I'm like, I wish there was a baseball team here. Baseball team? Granted, it's coming. You know what I mean? There's an NFL team here. Well, I wish they were as good as the Patriots. Well, we're hiring the Patriots offensive coordinator, and we're going to throw lots of mafia. I mean, lots of money at this. And so it has been wonderful being here. And you've already visited once.
And I'm already flirting with the idea of coming back the week after school. I can fly round trip, leaving on a Monday, coming back on a Thursday with a hotel room, single occupancy, $189. That's for hotel and airfare.
Flight? What airline are you on?
Well, it will be Frontier or Crush Your Spirit. It'll be one of those two.
Frontier or Crush Your Spirit airline. By the way, because of you, we've now flown on both of those airlines.
Yeah, I mean, if you go light, and I mean light as in don't take anything more than a computer bag, and you don't mind sitting in a plastic seat, they won't put you out on the wing. I mean, they're going to put you in the plane.
That's right.
Yeah.
In other words, how long can you torture yourself feeling cramped and miserable?
Couple hours for $30. I mean,
absolutely.
that's a
it's
good
$30
price.
to fly.
About 30, 40 bucks. I've flown under 50 one way, not several times, but a few times. That's with taxes and everything.
Wow. All right. Come and visit. Spike, last words.
Oh, I miss you guys. This is the best part of my day.
All right.
Seeing you two. I swear to God, nothing changes. It's
The
wonderful.
show is great, though. I'm listening. It's awesome. You
thanks.
guys are funny, and Jack really is the soul of the city. He's a young talk show host who gets better and better every single time I hear him. And
Thanks.
you're
Yeah.
this bleeding heart liberal who the two of you offset each other very nicely. And you have, I mean, dare I say, you're getting a little bit housebroken.
I appreciate that. I know you mean that with the best intention.
I actually mean that as a compliment. Like the bull in the china shop doesn't get asked back to a lot of china shops.
No, not very often. Yeah,
but
you're one and done.
You're funny. You're genuine. I had a dear friend who watches this podcast say to me, "Wow, Spike brings a lot to the table," and it's because you do. You read.
Thanks.
You read obsessively. You're like, I can't keep up with all of the talking points and bullet points and all of the most recent news developments. I tend to tune it all out with a sarcastic.
Yeah.
But the truth is, you're very well informed, and I learn stuff listening to you. So I'm a regular listener now. It's amazing how this internet works. You can hear anybody, anywhere, anytime.
I can't believe I've been blessed enough to have the life I've had and a chance to keep doing it. So right. I'm happy.
Both of you are doing great, important work. Check out Spike noon to 3, KIRO Mid Days, and check out Joe at his amazing
KMIH,
job.
man.
KMIH.org, anywhere in the world.
And you don't need a radio because it's KMIH.org, right?
Yeah.
MIH means Mercer Island High.
Yeah.
Which when I was in high school had a different connotation than it does now.
Yeah, I told them called MI High, but they don't like that one.
No.
Yeah, they don't like
anyway, you're doing amazing work. All right, everybody. Cheers. Let's close with the Bob, Spike, and Joe jingle. Here we go. Whoop. Did I hit it?